Moment of truth here. This is the body. You can see it wasn't much, 5 grams. And now look at that. Let's see what we get when we got all this on here. We're just going to weigh the pieces together individually. It'll make this a lot easier. Let's see. It's saying ounces. Well, that's not right. We just want grams. Okay, so we got 13, 27, and 49. Okay, that can't be right. Sorry, I just got it. Ah, there it is, gram. Okay, so I don't want to recalibrate it again. I could, but I just want to get a good idea of what this weighs now with the entire construction on there. And that's a pretty good indicator right there. So we got 32.3. Well, that just lost a lot of weight. Now, what I've done is trim the tips and cut the fat off the inside. So let's just see here. This is just all the junk that I thought would weigh right around 4 grams. But I'm guessing I was wrong and I overestimated it. And I got instead 2.7 grams off by making those changes. Now this thing looks more like a samurai sword, but it's still too big. And if we looked at it in terms of a wingspan, it's still a much bigger wingspan than this guy. So when you look at this together as an aircraft, you don't suddenly, because I trimmed it down, look at it and go, hey, that's a small plane. It's still got a way bigger wingspan. So that's something else to consider. So now what we're going to do is I'm actually going to trim this more, and we're going to see where that leads us, because this is all I want. I want a wing that is the correct weight for my glider. And right now, we're looking at about 30 grams if I took off 2.7, right? We're looking at 31 or so. Well, that's still too light. 30 grams is great, but we do want to go a little lighter than that. I'm looking to get it in under 28. At a minimum, I want 28. So I'm going to have to do a fairly big chunk off this, and we'll be back. All right. So I've removed a fair bit of material here. And now, if you look here, you'll notice it is a shorter wingspan. Now, obviously, I need to trim these up to fine-tune it, but it's a much shorter wingspan. It's still wider than the other aircraft. If I were to put the wing in about the same spot on the chassis kind of a thing, you see what I mean. It's still a wider wing, okay, which is what I want. But it's also longer lift because it's got a longer lift moment, okay? So it could have more lift and be a good aircraft if it has enough weight removed. So here's what I just removed. And we should tear that. We'll just turn it on and off. It should reset. There you go. So we're looking at 2.3. Add that to the 2.7 I had here. Well, that's 5 grams. And given that this was supposed to be 35, I'd say we should have just cracked the 30 mark. That's what that means. We should have cracked the 30 mark. And we did. 29.4 is what I'm seeing here. Or 29.8. Wow, that's so close. I wouldn't even say that we did crack it. I'd say that we're really close to cracking it. There, it's all balanced on it now. So now we really see. So it's 29.9. So we are under 30, but just barely. But that will make a huge difference to how it flies. I mean, that's a huge difference right there. And what that meant was taking out material. Removing wasn't that hard. I didn't have to totally redesign the airplane. I didn't have to rip it apart. I didn't have to do any of that. All I had to do was realize in my head that it was too big, too heavy. Okay? Now, one of the other things I can do is I have a reinforcement in here. And if I took that out, okay, bent it in half, put it half in one, half in the other, like you normally would a spar, and then glue it all in place, it'll be a lot stronger, help to hold the wing together. It won't be much stronger. In fact, half the wing will be about the same. The joint will be stronger, and it'll keep the weight centralized and out away from the wingtips, which will help prevent that whole tip down thing I was talking about when it's a little too heavy. That is something else I can do. And that would take one of these carbon fiber spars out completely. So I'm going to walk you through real quick how it is. You might want to do something like that. It's actually not hard because, believe it or not, this ain't really stuck together all that well. And all you need to do is open it enough that I can get that skewer out. So give me a second and I'll do it. Okay, I was wrong. I've utterly destroyed it. As I was prying it apart to get that skewer out, it broke. And now the plastic broke first. In fact, it cracked right through, which is bad. So that's junk, is what that means. All that effort for nothing. Why? Because now I'm left with one wing that in the end, really, for what I'm doing, is too long. Junk. 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 Like I said, too heavy. The tail's great. It's nice and light. It's bigger than this one. It's exactly in line with what I need. It's a little bit heavier of a tail than that one, and that's okay, because it's going to be a little bit heavier of an aircraft. Now, don't think this was a waste of time. We have learned a lot of things. Through flight testing this designed, I have learned that 35 grams is too much. I did not, however, fly it at 30 grams, and I bet you it would have been okay at 30 grams. But I don't want okay. I want it to be just shy of this one, essentially. This one's just too fast and flies too far. I want a little slower one that flies a little less far, which means it needs to be, say, 4 or 5 grams heavier. That one's 20. I was not kidding when I said I wanted it to be about 24 grams. But this is not so tragic, because even if I had cut more off it, most of the weight was up front, and it's evenly distributed throughout the wing. I would have to cut so much off that wing off, it's not going to be as good an aircraft anymore. So I do have enough material to make one more wing. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to make a wing that will have good rigidity, but won't be too crazy heavy, won't need the reinforcement, and will basically look like an F-86 Sabre. This one was pretty close to that. And all it involves is folding, gluing. We're going to cut this back edge off, but after we glue it, believe it or not, we're actually going to bend this one, shape the size of the wing we want, determine the chord of the wing we want. All that stuff is going to be fun. It's easy. I just have to think about it. What do I want? Well, I want it to fly a little slower than this one. That's it. I just want it to fly a little slower than this one. I could modify this one by weighting it, but that'd be a shame, because I really like this one the way it is. I don't want to mess with it. It's perfect. It's really fast. I like that. But I also want something else, something that is better for beginners, something that won't be too crazy, but you could build yourself fairly easily. So I came up with this guy. You could make it a couple of different ways. You could make it like a P-51 Mustang. You could make it like an F-86 Sabre. And it is very, very, very simple. It starts with a straight wing. Then we cut a tiny chunk out of it, and we move the two ends together. We put it in the buck, and we glue it all in place, all at once. If you get that right, you got it perfect. Now, that's why I tell you not to do it that way. All you do is do one step at a time, always, guys. Make a piece, then check it, then balance it, then put it on the aircraft. So we're going to go through that whole process. With this one, I never did balance it technically, but I did CG it, and that is balancing it. And so I did technically CG the airplane. Normally, I balance the wing individually, independently, meaning I take the wing off the airplane, I put it on a pivot, I balance it at its dead exact center. And if I can't get it to balance, one side is heavier than the other, and I start adding tape or taking off weight until it's perfect. That is called dynamically balancing. If you dynamically balance your wing right to left, it'll be a much better wing. So, a lot of this is focused on wing design. Big shock. You're going to make a little wing. You need to know a lot about wing design. So instead of trying to cram you full of information, I just thought I'd give you some examples and walk you through step by step what you need to do if you want a really good Park Flyer version of this. It is not to build a 20-gram bullet. A 20-gram bullet or an 18-gram bullet might be great if you're trying to break a world record, but you don't want to take that to the park and smoke somebody in the head with it. It's fast, and it's out of your control. It's not an RC. I'm going to build an RC version of that, and it's going to be badass, but it'll probably come in right around 24 grams, 25 grams, which is why right now I'm trying to build a 24, 25-gram machine to see. Now, at the most, I will accept 28 grams. I was thinking. But when I saw how much weight it looks like is on the aircraft, when it gets to 30 grams, it was still a chunky bird, and it was still overweight. It still had a really broad wingspan. So I've realized I need to make my F-86 even smaller. It won't be bigger than this. It'll be smaller. It'll appear to be smaller because the wings will be swept back. But when I put them end to end, and you really look, it'll actually have a slightly bigger wingspan than this one, but only slightly. That's one thing. I had a way bigger wingspan. I mean, if you looked at this and you realized I had two of those on it, you look at the wingspan there and you see what I'm talking about. That was a big wingspan. So even though it might seem like a tragedy, it's not. I knew it was way too heavy as soon as I flew it, and even when I was building it and I had the wing in my hand, I remember thinking, oh man, this is going to be way too heavy. But I knew it had good lift, and it could theoretically fly, and if I could make something that heavy fly, that overweight fly, then I had made a really good wing. So that was one way for me to test it, was to make it as heavy as I could imagine it flying, which I did. And it did technically fly, so I can't really complain. It did well. It just isn't good enough because I wouldn't enjoy it enough to take it to the park and go whip it around. It'll fly maybe 40, 50 feet, and then it drops. If I put a really good elastic on it, I might get 80 or 90 feet out of it, but that's not very much. And if I'm doing like a big aileron loop, it's not really going to perform very well because it likes to slip out of the sky sideways. That's not the best design for that sort of thing. I'd be better off doing a MiG or an F-86 Sabre or a T-33. Any of those would be better emulation targets than what I was basically going after. You might think, no, that was based on an F-86 Sabre, believe it or not. And this one will be too. Only this time, I'm going to get it right. I'm going to build it light. I'm going to build it with a single spar. In fact, I'm going to reuse this one. I'll just crack it in half very gently, or even better, soak it overnight and then fold it into place and hold it there and let it dry out. And when it dries out, it'll stay in that position, and then I can just set it into place, glue it in, and it'll take half the glue because I had this all glued in all the way along the wing. Perfect example. I showed that the whole wing with the spar inside is about 8 grams. Without that, this is probably a half a gram per side. It's very light. So for having each side of the wing weigh 8 grams, that was really heavy. If I took this out and just weighed the wing, I don't think it weighs 8 grams. It might. It's probably 10, 12 grams, but that's just shy of one whole sheet of this stuff. So you'll see, we're going to make a sick wing. Don't discourage, don't despair. You always learn from your mistakes. In my case, this wasn't a mistake. This was to show you that you cannot build too heavy of an aircraft. No matter what you do, it won't fly right, even if it looks really good. It did fly right. It was straight. It was level. It was great. And then it nosed down and it dove to the ground. No matter how much I make it aerodynamic, it's heavy. And eventually it just comes down. And while I've made it so it glides down on a nice slope, because it's properly weighted and it makes good lift and all that stuff, it's still coming down way too fast because it is way too heavy. So that's it for this one. I'm going to light my cigarette of disappointment and take a break and come back at it. The tail is perfect. It's going to stay. Keith out.